Welcome to Liberal Europe podcast. I'm your host Ricardo Silvestre, and thank you so much for listening to today's episode. For this conversation, it's a pleasure to be joined by Daniel Lindvall. He's a senior researcher at climate change leadership at Uppsala University, and he's also the author of the ELF policy paper, How to Build Public Acceptance for Wind Power Across Europe. We're going to go into the main thesis of the paper, some local examples, and some policy recommendations. And after our main conversation, please stay to hear a little more about the path that Daniel took before I got him into the podcast. But now, with no further ado, I bring you Daniel Lindvall. I'm here with Daniel Lindvall. Daniel, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Oh, it's great to have you here and to talk about the policy paper that you wrote for the European Liberal Forum. This is How to Build Public Acceptance for Wind Power Across Europe. And let's start with a baseline, which is wind power is a valuable and good solution to decarbonization of our economy and our society. Tell us then, what are some of the benefits of investing in this source of renewable energy?
We can see that the cost of renewable energy, solar and wind, has been going down quite dramatically over the last 10 years or last 20 years. So it's very cost effective. In comparative to investing in other energy sources. Solar is of course cheaper, but if you want to have those sort of like grand scale energy infrastructures, wind power might be even more preferable. So in comparison to fossil fuel or fossil gas and so on, wind power is of course preferred, and especially within the European Union context where we have policy instruments that will put a price on carbon emissions, and where we have policy instruments steering the amount of renewable energy and clean energy we need. So those are the incentives. But of course, in today's context, investing in clean energy that can be produced at site is, of course, extremely important from an energy security perspective, because we don't want to be reliant on imports of fossil fuel from Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other authoritarian states, also from the United States. Right now, it doesn't seem to be.
You also mentioned economic development, which is another engine behind it, which is naturally not only the benefit of having the energy, but the benefit of actually building the infrastructure for the energy collection and then distribution.
Yeah, of course. If you look at Sweden, for instance, we've had quite dramatic expansion of wind power, and it has affected our energy prices positively. So the energy prices come down within the European Union context. The wind power industry is, it's comparatively big. So in the sense of generating job opportunities and economic development, investing in wind power a good option. So I think there's many reasons why we should invest in wind power.
As you diagnosed during your policy paper the benefits, you also mentioned naturally. What are the factors now that affect that wind power acceptance at the member states of the European Union? Actually, you do mention the Renewable Energy Directive and how the European Commission is trying to exactly do that work with the member states. So for our listeners, but also they see the windmills. Like I remember in the Netherlands, getting the bus from Brussels to The Hague, and there was all the windmills. Or here in Portugal, the same thing in Sweden. So tell us a little bit then to our listeners, what have you seen from your research of the major resistance points to this clearly beneficial solution?
So the research that I am doing on wind power is mainly focusing on what we call public acceptance or public attitudes to wind power, or wind parks that are built in the vicinity of where they live, where people. And obviously, we know that there is that people normally get less positive to wind powers if they build in their area or in the site of where they're living, and which could be quite natural. I mean, that's nothing particular to do with wind power. If you build an industry just nearby, people could be affected because their landscape are changed, or especially wind power could be as sensitive as it could be constructed in an area where people are, they have specific feelings about the area, since it might be some kind of environmental beauty or so on. So, and we've seen that that kind of proximity effect. So the closer the wind power is built by the house, the less positive people are, and people could be affected by the noise of the wind turbines, or the flashing lights that could be turned on during night and so on. So those kind of, and so there's been this discussion about what we can call a NIMBY effect. However, we've seen another interesting effect with wind power and also other types of infrastructure, which some people call it's like a working land perception. So if people feel that they are benefit from the investment, then let's say it's an industry or factory, people can see that employment are going up, or their local area is being developed economically. People normally change their perception about that investment or that infrastructure. And the same thing happens with wind power. We can see that areas that are economically benefited by the investment in wind power are normally more positively inclined to wind power. The problem with wind power in this perspective is wind power is you have an investment initially where it could generate some employment opportunities, but normally not naturally in the area, because the investment or the construction workers are brought in, it's built, and then you might have some service personnel, but it's normally not very so it's not an employment intensive type of investment, so it's not naturally generating that much those types of returns to the area. So we can see that many people in the area of a wind power park could have a sense of, they can perceive that this is some kind of exploitation of their vicinity, where they feel that the benefits or the profits of that energy infrastructure is being distributed to a location somewhere else, if they're not getting anything back from it. So I think that's we've seen that in many of these kind of surveys or interview research, that's something that's very important for the attitudes of local communities.
Not getting too technical here, but I can't avoid asking you this follow-up, but isn't that like counterintuitive, which is, okay, the energy is going someplace else. Well, actually, the energy is right here next to you. We can have like a distribution sector for your entire village. So people, they don't feel that benefit, or they don't see that benefit, or actually the building, it's not made or hasn't been made until now to account for that. Because there's a lot of conversation, and actually there's a publication with the European Liberal Forum we're very honored to publish, which is the renewable energy communities. It's a little different, I know, but the idea it is for the communities to benefit from this. So it is just a question of perception, or actually people are right when they're complaining about this.
Yeah, I mean, feelings of injustice is always a subjective judgment, of course. Whether you could perhaps, but there is something specific with wind power that I would say. If solar power can often be built in a more sort of how would I say, they could be installed like a micro investments on rooftops where the energy generated would benefit the inhabitants of that house directly. You could you could use that energy locally. While wind power is normally more of, you do have those small scale wind power investments that are could be even locally owned or co-owned by energy communities, but they nowadays wind power is becoming more and more, they're becoming larger, and that kind of investments are quite difficult for local communities to carry or to co-own. Or so it's so in that sense, it's generating energy that is distributed out in the grid, and even
Yes.
if local communities could indirectly perhaps get lower energy bills, anyone gets, of course, if you have, but it doesn't really. There is not. That's not really a matter of just perception. That's a fact. You are having that infrastructure nearby, and you're not directly benefited by it in the sense that you would have been by, say, locally owned solar power or something like that.
Gotcha.
The difference would be in some areas where you do have some kind of local taxation on wind power. That's the case in many countries. You do have some kind of property tax or some kind of other asset tax that is collected on local level. So in that sense, the municipality could benefit directly, and in that way, the local community can see the fruits of that investment. The rate of that tax, it differs very much. If you've seen Sweden, for instance, it's extremely low. So the municipalities would, it's doesn't actually, the most of that tax is also gathered nationally. So the municipalities don't really get anything at all from that tax. While in Finland, the municipalities do get directly. So that's a big difference. And secondly, you often have some kind of informal agreement between the wind power investor and the local communities, where you could have some kind of community benefits. So the communities could get some returns by, say, an agreement that, okay, we'll build this, we'll invest in, we'll see to it that the roads are improved, or you get fiber internet connection, or whatever, those kind of. So that,
or a community center, or will help
exactly.
you improve your school. That was pretty much my idea. Not just grab a cable and get a cable to each own place. I was thinking more like, all right, we understand your perception that this is a general benefit, which is the energy comes and gets into the grid, but we will help you, as you said, we will improve the roads, or we'll improve a school, or we'll build a community center, or we'll build a sports complex.
Yeah,
that was my thought.
Those kind of agreements are quite common, and in some countries there are formal requirement for that kind of agreement, or there are guidelines for that kind of agreements. And we know that they can be effective, that people who are living in those areas they appreciate, because they might, wind power are often built, depending on the topography of the country, but it's often built in areas where there are not many people living, and those areas might be countrysides where the municipalities or the national governments have not devoted that much attention. So the wind power investments could actually make a big difference for people living there. Secondly, if you own the land where the wind power is built, if you're a farmer, or if you're a forest owner, then of course the equation is completely different. And then this could be extremely beneficial extremely. They could be fairly beneficial for the landowner. So in that sense, and you can see that depends very much on the structure of the country. If you have a country where, for instance, in many parts of the United States, where you have where farmers are leasing their land to wind power companies, they can see that they can make quite a lot of the returns are quite good for those landowners. Same thing in Sweden. But you might also have conflicts between individuals who are landowner, forest owners, or farmers, and other people who are not owning land and therefore not getting anything.
Before we move on from the conversation, one last example from my side, which is, for example, in my home country, when you have windmills in our main hills, so we have mountains, smaller ones compared to other places of Europe, but the fact that there are roads that had to be not paved roads naturally, but open roads so that you can get there, that was also presented as a way to combat forest fires, which is a scourge here in my home country. So that was one of those indirect benefits, which is if we have open roads, we can have the firemen getting into the fires quickly because they don't have to like drive in the middle of nowhere. You diagnosed some of the resistance also on the policy paper. You present solutions. One of them you already mentioned, which is taxation, for example. Give us a couple more that you saw being effective to resolve this problem of public acceptance.
First thing, just one more thing to say about compensation. I think that's it's key for public acceptance, but also I think governments need to think about seeing to it that this is that these agreements are not. I mean that there are some kind of formal regulations, because there's always. That could be tricky when you end up in a situation where the local communities need to negotiate with the investor, because then you have the investor, maybe a big company with a capital of lawyers, negotiating with local communities who are not resourceful in those negotiations. So you might end up in a situation where the local communities might be have a sense of we are bribed, or we've not settled a good deal, and so on. Secondly, so that, and I think also it's good to have some kind of intermediary involved, preferably the municipality, which is often like a sort of like local democratic arena. So if they could get some kind of benefit from from the investment in some form of local tax, that would give them a stake in this game, where the local arena could be where the local politicians could see that this is beneficial, but they could also have an interest in seeing to it that all the interests are addressed and so on. So that's quite important. And that brings us also to the procedural aspects, because it's not only a perception of sort of distributional injustice, that I'm not gaining anything, but it could also be that my voices have not been heard. You've just made this investment and I've had, I think investors have a lot to gain from seeing to it that you have a proper sort of participatory process before the investment, seeing to it that everyone's properly informed. Having said that, it is a bit tricky as well, because we've seen, cases from Sweden where you have those interest groups that are sort of they're basically just against wind power, and they use those community meetings to organize resistance, which is because normally when you have those local resistance, it's the thing with wind power is often like a lot of people have sort of like, they don't, they care, but they are pro wind power, but it's nothing, you wouldn't go out and demonstrate for an investment in your local community. You're happy, you were satisfied, you wouldn't say very much. But then you have a couple of individuals who are extremely annoyed, or for different reasons. Could be ideological reasons. They've sort of wind power doesn't really fit with their ideological mindset, or it could be that they are physically disturbed specific because it's very close to their home and so on. So normally you have sort of an angry, loud minority and a silent majority. This is something we see with climate policies generally. People are sort of like happy with whatever climate. They want something to happen, but it's nothing normal. Most people don't express their voices. But you have a minority that are extremely angry, loud, and And then politicians they get nervous and they don't know how to deal with this.
There's this video on YouTube right now, which with Samuel L. Jackson promoting Vattenfall, and I hope I said that name correctly, which is a very funny and actually quite impactful commercial, because Samuel Jackson, we know, and I can't say the words that he says because this is a family-friendly podcast. But again, go see the video and then come back and hear Daniel have his thoughts on this. But I think, from my perspective, it was quite effective because it gives that image of not only being funny, but also being informative. What do you think about that kind of intervention at the society level, which is to have commercials, to have this kind of products that you can see online? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think I think it could be an effective video, and it's. We must be, and Vattenfall is trying to now. I think they're trying to become. Do a video that people are watching at social media and so on. Because the problem is that
it became viral. It's a sensation.
Became viral, yeah, and that's not easy to get something viral in these days. You need to have talent, but I think what's is problematic with the renewable energy and the energy transition today is that there's so much disinformation. Especially, fossil fuel industry has, of course, see this as a threat to their economic business, of course, and but also unfriendly governments like, especially Russia, has been investing a lot of money into disinformation about the climate transition. Because the climate transition it's a threat to the whole their whole governmental, the whole economic model. Because once European Union decarbonize, we will have more energy security. We will have great independence of these governments, and Russia will and other authoritarian states will lose some of their influence.
Just one final note for me, which is, and again to our listeners, go into the policy paper, because Daniel goes exactly when one of the policy recommendations is that EU member states must act to curb disinformation campaigns targeting climate policy. Now, for people that want to know more about this very important question and they can follow your work online, tell us where people can find you.
You have a webpage where I sometimes publish my academic articles, and I did actually write a book as well, which is free online right now. So if you want to read it as an ebook, it's called Climate Change and the Endurance of Democracy. It's published at Routledge. So it's about how climate change would impact the stability of democracy.
I'm going to put all the links on the show notes. I've been talking with Daniel Lindvall. The policy paper is How to Build Public Acceptance for Wind Power Across Europe. Daniel, this was very illuminating and very interesting. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
So, Daniel, tell us a little about yourself. What was the path that you took to the point that I have you now on the podcast?
Mm-hmm. Well, I work at Uppsala University, which is one of the major universities in Sweden, at the Department of Earth Sciences, where we have a unit called the Climate Change Leadership. And my research is focused on social aspects of the climate and energy transition. So aspects regarding justice, democracy, public acceptance, and so on. But I must say that I've also had a career before. I did work for the Swedish government for almost 10 or 11 years, mainly with aspects related to democratic affairs, and I also worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a while with different issues. So I haven't got a straight academic career in the sense that I've been did a PhD and then continued. I've been on and off from university, but right now this is what I'm focusing on.
Where does that interest comes from? Is it something that has been with you for a long time, or it just came up later in your life and you got really interested?
I got very interested in, when I worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was interested more in like security politics, and I worked for the European Union for a while as well.
Oh, there's a connection between energy and security. So
it is. But I did. I was when I worked for the government. I got a position to do to be the principal inquiry secretary for something called Democracy Commission. So we did there was a big commission reviewing these sort of challenges to the Swedish democracy and how we reform it and so on. And that was done for the government, but also Parliament was involved. So I was the main civil servant in that work. And while I worked with that, I always had an interest in environmental policies and environmental issues. And I've really got stuck by the sort of perplexing issue of democracy and climate change. I mean, can democracy deliver the solutions, and how would democracy be affected? And then I also realized that energy systems and energy policies are very much related to how to politics, and how if a country is very reliant on fossil fuels, you'll have the power relations that will affect the power relations in that country.
Very good. Well, we're always open to have you back to talk about democracy, because that's a non-exhaustive topic here in the conversation. So what does the future bring to you? Meaning next projects or big projects, or maybe going back to fighting for democracy? What's in your horizon apart from windmills?
I do have, windmills is one, but I'm also doing a project on EU climate policies, and especially, public acceptance and the social economic implications of the emission trading system, the new emission trading systems, and how it could be adjusted to alleviate these sort of distributional consequences in order to enhance acceptance. Because what we can see in our research is that if people have a perception that something is just and fair, then that would change the equation very, very saliently. I mean, I think people are guided by that feeling that things are fair. And that's of course a subjective judgment, but it's very important for attitudes, and especially whether people accept or oppose things. So that's something I'm involved in doing in research on that.
This is all for now. I'll be back soon with more podcasts. You can always visit the website liberalforum.eu to know more about the activities of the European Liberal Forum. So until the next episode, let's keep making the world a better place.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast